4 phases of glycolysis. While glycolysis is a process of 10 steps, each with their own specific enzyme, products, and reactants, it is also important to understand the larger picture by breaking down glycolysis into 4 phases. This will also help with understanding the ATP energy yield and regulation of the process. So phase 1 includes steps 1 through 3. This phase is the ATP investment phase, and we will focus here on just the steps that include an investment of ATP. We see here in step 1, which is glucose to glucose 6-phosphate, we have an investment of 1 ATP. And then we have step 3, which is fructose 6-phosphate to fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, we have another investment of ATP. So during this ATP investment phase, which includes steps 1 through 3, we have an investment of 2 ATP. The second phase of glycolysis includes step 4. This phase includes the conversion of 1,6-carbon compound, which is this fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, to 2 3-carbon compounds, and essentially it will be an eventual conversion to 2 glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate compounds, which will continue on for the rest of the process. Phase 3 includes steps 5 through 9. This is the ATP harvesting phase. And during this phase, we will also focus on the steps that involve a production of an ATP molecule. You'll see here in this step, which is conversion of 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate to 3-phosphoglycerate, we have production or yield of 1 ATP. And since these pathways are mirror pathways or parallel pathways, we actually double each of the ATP that are produced. So here's 1 and then 2 ATP from the conversion of 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate to 3-phosphoglycerate. And then lastly, we have production of ATP with the conversion of phosphoenolpyruvate to pyruvate. And again, we double that. So there's 1 and then 2 ATP that are yielded. So during this phase 3, which includes steps 5 through 9, we have a harvesting or production of 4 ATP. Additionally notable during this third phase, and also related to ATP or energy yield, is the production of NADH. So while this is not a direct production of ATP, in this step from glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate to 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, and we have this happening in these parallel pathways, so production of 1 and then 2 NADHs during this third phase. These NADHs, as we'll talk about when we review the electron transport chain, will be used for eventual conversion to ATP. So during glycolysis, we do want to keep track of not only our ATP yield, but additionally our NADH that is yielded. Lastly, we have our fourth phase of glycolysis, which includes step 10, and this is the fate of pyruvate. So we have this last intermediate is pyruvate of the process of glycolysis, which is in the big picture conversion of glucose to pyruvate. And pyruvate from here will be converted to one of 2 products, and this would be depending on the metabolic environment or conditions of the cell. So in an anaerobic environment, pyruvate would be converted to lactate, pyruvate to lactate in anaerobic conditions. However, in the presence of oxygen and in aerobic conditions, we have conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA. And that's through the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, which is the conversion of pyruvate to acetyl-CoA, again in the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, which we will be talking about in more detail. But those would be the 2 eventual fates of pyruvate. In anaerobic conditions, it would go to be converted to lactate. In aerobic conditions, it would be converted to acetyl-CoA. From here, I'd like to go on and continue to discuss the ATP yield during the 10 steps of glycolysis, including the energy investment phases and the energy harvesting phases. And the yield of ATP depends on if glucose is coming from the blood or if it's coming from or originating from muscle glycogen. And so we'll discuss the two different ATP yields based on the conditions, again, of glucose either coming from the blood or from muscle glycogen. So with the 10 steps of glycolysis, as we had discussed, in the energy investment phase, we have investment of 2 ATP, one in step 1 and one in step 3. And then in the third phase of glycolysis, the energy harvesting phase, we produce 4 ATP. So producing 4 ATP, investing 2 ATP, we have a net yield of 2 ATP. And this is when we get glucose from the blood. It's a little bit different when we get glucose from the cleavage of glucose from muscle glycogen. We're going to talk about this process of glycogenolysis in more detail. However, when we have glucose originating from muscle glycogen, we have less ATP that is invested. So from this slide, you can see when we have glycogen and the cleavage of glycogen to release glucose in the muscle cell, that glucose that is cleaved from muscle glycogen is in the form of glucose 6-phosphate. And so with the glucose coming from muscle glycogen already in the form of glucose 6-phosphate, we actually invest one less ATP when that glucose is originating from muscle glycogen. So as you can see then, going back to our yields, with glucose originating from muscle glycogen, we invest 1 ATP only at that step 3. We essentially skip step 1 and that first investment of ATP. So we invest 1 ATP during phase 1, and we still produce 4 ATP during phase 3, which results in a yield of 3 ATP when we have glucose originating from muscle glycogen.